My name is Sanna. I work for Murilett and do hosting and editing and writing outside of that. So conversations with artists such as Katja are my bread and butter. Today's evening, it's weird when the sun never goes down, but today's evening will happen in 3 parts. We'll open with some questions from me to Katja, and then we're gonna see some more works from I guess the history of your makings, and thus gain a better ground from which to understand the sort of further exploration of what we have at display here. I am arriving to this conversation with from a position of someone that is quite new to thinking about jewelry as a more expansive art form than what I have on my body today. I remember I arrived here at 3 o'clock to meet with Katja beforehand, and I looked in the mirror, was thinking, is she gonna judge me for what I'm wearing? But I'm assuming that didn't take place. But yeah, so I will gladly make space for a later part in the conversation to have you either ask questions or make little comments to Katja about what you have seen or, hello, welcome. What you have seen or will see later, and yeah, drinks, jewelry, conversation about well-being. There's not really too much else that we can ask. But I would also like to give a slightly more extended intro to who we have here showing her works today. So Katja Toporski is a Frankfurt-born jewelry artist who had her start in life, perhaps, as an anesthesiologist, and was born to a family of pharmacists, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Mm-hmm. Lovely. And has been living in Washington, D.C. or near it for quite a while now. So that's a very sort of quick version of a life story that actually fits, so much more. And you also work as a writer, as a curator, as a teacher, and as an artist. That's right. So I wanted to ask as the first question from you today. So I understand that you probably tell the story of how the shift in your career trajectory took place 50 times a year, if not more. Yeah?
Something like that. First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone for coming here. That's really nice. And I spent all day putting up my work in this fabulous gallery in this most interesting space. So that's been a lot of fun. So thank you for coming out and listening to this. Now I need to remember your question. So
yes, the question was just about to come. I was curious as to how the way that you tell the story from when you first started to how you tell the story now. Has that changed in any shape or form?
You know what? I think actually, so I always say that jewelry has been my first love, but it was not my first career. And so I tried to become a jeweler even after high school. And in Germany, the way it works is that I don't know how it works in Estonia, but there you would typically do an apprenticeship for 3 years, and then maybe go. I mean, this was like a while ago, so I didn't really know about some of the programs that exist now. They weren't as big then, and so I just didn't like the idea of working in a jewelry shop, for 8 hours a day with an hour lunch break. I just didn't sit with me. But I also had other options, and going to medical school was one of them. But I have to say, so I kind of went down that route with medical school, and then I moved to the UK to work and train as an anesthesiologist. And there was something.
Can I ask why the UK?
Oh, that was because my husband's British, so that's where I moved to the UK. And at the time, it was kind of difficult to get good jobs in Germany as a doctor. They had too many at the time. So that's why the UK. And then I started working as an anesthesiologist, and it's kind of stressful. And the thing that I did for kind of stress relief, what I found was that they offered these jewelry classes in the local art school, and I went, and I felt like this was the most relaxing thing ever to make jewelry, and I finally learned all the kind of things that you needed to learn.
Yeah.
And then when we moved to the US 10 years later, it was kind of like, it was complicated to work as a doctor in the US. And
Can I ask why?
A number of things. One is that they don't accept any foreign medical training. They don't really accept many foreign anything, to be honest. But definitely medical training, that you have to like repeat all of the exams. You have to repeat all of the training. And that typically means you work for 100 hours a week. And I just didn't really want to do that. And so I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first moment from even before you moved either to the UK or to the US of really having a deep connection with the type of material or to the process of making something jewelry related?
Oh, that's a tough question. I have certain I always used to make jewelry, even when I was in high school. Some of my friends still have the jewelry that I made when I was 18 or something silly. But I love to paint also, and I think I always, in fact, when I was in medical school in Munich, I used to work in the art supply store in the Academy of Fine Arts, and I loved the shop. I loved to work there. They had all these that has nothing to do with jewelry, that they sold like paintbrushes and stuff, right? But they also sold like the individual pigments and then the binders to mix up the various kinds of paints. I loved the place. So if you ask about a material, that was definitely a first love affair with any kind of material.
Nice. So when I was doing a really intense, in-depth background check or research, I found a book that featured your name in it. It's by, let's see. Okay, nice. It's by Kathy Sawyer. Do you know this?
Uh-oh.
So it's a book called The Rock from Mars, a true detective story on two planets. So in there, the author writes, Katja Toporski was a captivating anesthesiologist he had met years earlier while working at a hospital in Ireland. Now they were expecting.
Oh my God, you did some, how did you even find that? So this is much more about my husband and me. So my husband does research on Mars, finding life on Mars. So he's very involved in meteorite analysis and what is in them, and then what is life and what isn't life, and how could it exist, and how did life develop on Earth before we had anything, right? So that's this kind of research. I didn't even know that author wrote anything about me in there, so I'm amazed that you're
in there, yeah. Okay, so there was a little Ireland moment in there as well, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, nice. So as I mentioned, jewelry maker, curator, writer, anesthesiologist. I wanted to ask, what do you feel like connects these different roles? Is there something that you feel pulled you in those directions that is sort of cross-sectional?
The thing that is the hardest to explain is the anesthesiologist part. I would say that out of all things in medicine, that the reason why I chose that is because you kind of left in peace more. Like you don't have to talk that much, which normally as a doctor you have to talk a lot to your colleagues, your patients, everything like that. And it's kind of more quiet work, and I think that's what I like about all of those professions. I think because it just allows me to do my thing and not be pulled in 10 different directions at the same time. I don't do so well with that. Yeah. And then these other, when I say writer or curator, they're all part of the jewelry umbrella, really. I don't write about other things than jewelry. I teach things that are broad, but they're all related to jewelry. That's what I teach. And so and curating is only jewelry related, and so that's where I feel like that all belongs together. Is all in there. That all belongs together for sure.
Okay, nice. So this collection show that we have at display here is about well-being, and as I read online again, it was mostly inspired by the the losses and the sort of intense experience that we are somewhat still have had since the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak. Questions around well-being, and I was wondering what your experience during the pandemic is or was.
Well, on the face of it, you could say, nobody lost their job, or, we've been doing fine. But I think a lot of people could say that, but really that is the kind of surface of it. A lot of people, nobody died in my immediate family or even in my friend group. But everyone has had, I don't know, things that are mostly mental, that were really hard to kind of cope with. The anxiety about going out again when you haven't been able to go and see anybody other than who was in your house with you for so long. My daughter, who was in high school and developed a major eating disorder from, just being locked up. And we did not have school for a year and a half, zero school. And so it's those kinds of things that I feel like were really, and I hear it now, I talk more with friends now, I see them again. Everybody has those kinds of stories where, you don't feel well, like nobody died, but still nobody's well either, and then also, what did you do to maybe try and keep well also, right? I mean, my husband plays in a rock band. They weren't allowed to practice. What did they do? When the weather was good, they plugged in outside and practiced in the garden, whatever. But it's, what are the things that you can do to maybe
learning new coping mechanisms, finding
better.
Alternative avenues towards healing. And do you imagine jewelry and the sort of experience that your work potentially could provide as a nudge towards that healing process to take place?
Yeah, I think jewelry has a role in that anyway, and I think for one of the many roles that jewelry has in my mind, the role of, I don't know, I remember having experiences like holding certain things, and it just feels good to hold. And sometimes people have, a rock that they found somewhere and they carry with them all the time, or a shell or something like that. And it's maybe not even jewelry as you can put it on your body, but it still has that kind of, it conveys that experience.
A sort of token. I mean, I would maybe turn to you for a moment, and if you can show me if you have an item like the one that Katja just described, maybe that isn't worth too much, but you just kind of hold on to it for sentimental reasons and feel it or touch it from time to time. Okay, we have a couple here. Okay, nice. Yeah, it's quite widespread. And I went back years on Katja's Instagram page, which I really would recommend that you follow. And I went through your portfolio and I wrote down some words that I feel like would describe your work well, and the show that we have here as well. Muted hues, tender textures, crumble, play with light and transparency, rough roundness, repetitive patterns, impermanence, philosophizing. Yeah, do you feel like it's accurate?
Maybe not all of it, but yeah, philosophizing definitely. Okay. Yeah, that's a good summary.
But when I was reading up, then one thing that I would be curious to have you explain to me is that you mention interest in archetypal objects in your biography. And I was just curious, what are archetypal objects? Do you have some examples for us?
Yeah, I do. And maybe I'll show some in the slides that I have in a bit. But, objects that we all understand what they are to begin with, right? And so that's what I mean by archetype. Like an egg, for instance, right, is an archetypal, and we all have associations. What if somebody asks you to have associations about an egg, you'll come up with all sorts of things, right? And that's what I mean by archetype. Some like a kind of primordial object, but also they can be man-made. I mean, I did a little bit of work with. Maybe that goes back to what I have in the slideshow, but with like archaeological objects, right? And but to me, they also have certain meaning that I think are sort of more universal. I think that's what I mean by those kinds of objects.
That have both the meaning that is directly associated to it and or with it, and then some sort of a symbolic, broader societal meaning.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's right.
nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I would ask you one more question, and then we'll actually be able to see what the work is about, and then we can have the second part of the conversation. So again, I looked into things and I found an interview you gave in 2016, and this is what you said. As I conceive my work, I focus exclusively on my inner voice, on the things that matter to me, and later the design and technical challenges I may have to overcome. That way, my work stays true to itself, is a free expression of myself, speaks its own jewelry language. In the end, the aim is complete immersion in the work, leaving no room for other thoughts in the mind other than the work in front of me. So firstly, do you still relate to that?
It's interesting.
Sentence?
Yeah, yes and no, because I sometimes think that the technical aspect of jewelry making can be overwhelming. And while it is what I enjoy doing, it is also almost like an engineering task. And for me, sometimes in my mind, the work is already kind of made, and then I have to still go and make it. And sometimes it's like, I'm still, weeks later, I'm still working on this. Why isn't it finished? And so it's a little bit, maybe it's a more idealistic version of myself. And I would say sometimes in some works that it is still like that. I sometimes worry that the technical aspects are just very kind of complex, and they take a different side of your brain than the kind of ideation, creative part of it. And it's hard to bring them together sometimes. And I think it's specific to jewelry that is a problem.
I mean, if you haven't gone as deep into Katja's work as I have by now, then it might be news to you that Katja takes on impossible and really intense challenges in her work that involve, if anyone knows the CAD program.
Oh yeah.
Optical illusions with her work, all sorts of different materials, intense explorations of a variety of different ways of seeing jewelry that we'll also look into. Do you feel like that complete immersion that you described here and also in the beginning of our conversation is something that still brings you back to jewelry? Is that sort of reason for making it? For sure.
And I will say, like life gets complicated sometimes, right? And it's hard, that complete immersion, to actually get that. And actually, right from here, I will travel to Norway to go for a 1-month artist residency. And I've done a number of artist residencies in the past, and that is where you get that, because like you don't have to think about cooking dinner or like running your kids somewhere or something, like those kinds of everyday things. So it's and it's something that in graduate school, when you study, that's kind of what you get. I mean, there I just let everybody do their thing and ignore dinner. And so
dinner can just be a box of cereal.
So that is definitely. I think that is in reality, it's really hard to. Plus, all these other hats that I wear, like the teaching, like. I don't even know, like in the fall already, I have 4 classes that I need to teach and prepare for. That's a lot, And so you're constantly pulled in different directions. So it's hard to really achieve that's an ideal state, actually. That's what I would say. And it's hard to achieve it. It's an ideal state, though. That's what, for sure.
And then sometimes you do achieve it, and then we get this. Let's see.
Okay, so, all right. So I'm going to skip through some of the slides because I don't want to, take up extra time, and I don't want to repeat some of the things that we already went through. So I just want to kind of start with the work that maybe I start with this one slide that was right before I started grad school. So before I went to grad school, I made like more kind of goldsmithy jewelry. And I made work that you can sell quite well, right? Or mostly commissions. People would ask me engagement rings and wedding rings and things like that, or anniversary or birthday things. And I then started exploring different materials, but also this idea of the archetype, like with this kind of key here, that came to me. And I also started to sort of break down a few barriers that I feel like I had within me when it came to jewelry making. This sort of idea that, I don't know, things have to be framed and symmetrical and neat, and sort of trying to kind of break free a little bit from that idea. And that is what actually kind of provoked me to apply to graduate school and go back to be a student. Okay, so this is one of the things. This is one of the archetypal objects that I started to explore in grad school early on, and it was this famous Venus figurine, the Willendorf Venus, and what I found, I just learned about computer-aided design, and I found that it's possible to download 3D scans of all sorts of stuff. At the time, there was this weird website called TurboSquid, and it had like these free 3D scans, and you just download them and then 3D print it and do whatever else with it. So, but of course, I was not interested in just kind of making a copy of something. I think that's insanely boring. So what I did, and what I often do, and this is why I sort of included this slide here, is because this sort of became a bit of a strategy of mine, is I start with a 3D scan sometimes, and then a 3D print even, but then I make a mold and cast it in something else, some other material, right? And the necklace here on the right actually was this, I had made these castings of these Venus copies of using beeswax, which I then put into, what was it, like sheepgut, which is like sausage casing. Sausage casing. And I let the sausage casing dry around the beeswax Venus figures, and then heated it up in the oven and let it melt out. And it was really interesting because what you're left with is this kind of really delicate skin that is kind of drenched in beeswax, and it still kind of kept most of the shape of the Venus there. So it's sort of a multi-step process to arrive there. Related to that is on this next slide, there's this pendant here. I was also interested in the surface and what stays on the surface. This is the back of this piece is on that piece there. So that's how it looks like. So I had made a copy of this Venus using gelatin, and I'll say a lot more about gelatin in a minute. And I rolled it in charcoal dust and then put this kind of concrete casting around it, and then removed the original, and some of this charcoal dust was kind of stuck in the silhouette that was left behind. So I was really kind of interested in that interaction. There's also here, the eggs was something that I did work with for a while as well. And these were just straight up 3D printed and then dyed with indigo dye. So let me see if this works, because this is kind of funny. Anyway, so I made this ginormous necklace out of, that was a copy of the necklace that Audrey Hepburn was wearing in Breakfast at Tiffany's. This like 5-strand like beads and all this kind of stuff in the front. And I made this big fat mold out of it and poured a red wine and gelatin into it and made a necklace that actually like totally, was made out of red wine. And then I did this sort of time-lapse video, because the thing about gelatin is like it's one of these things that like it melts in your mouth, right? And it kind of it actually melts at skin temperature. So that's why this kind of then started to totally disintegrate. So I thought that was a really interesting kind of phenomenon that you have with gelatin.
Can I ask how long this took?
Yeah, it actually took 2 hours. And a friend of mine is a photographer, and he had friends coming. This is why I'm talking, which was kind of good as well. But what was also what I did, so this was one thing that interested me about gelatin. And the other thing, here we go. The other thing that interested me was the fact that the original, I did this also with that necklace, if you just don't put it on your skin and just leave it out, it actually just dries. And it dries in this really interesting way. So these shapes here were this original little tiny amphora flask. And I cast them in gelatin. Again, I rolled it in some kind of sort of like flour-like material. And then it dried. And again, it has this sort of skin-like texture. It's like old skin that happens. And the shapes are really kind of interesting that come out of it. And it's something that I still go back to at times. All right, I have one more messy thing, and then it gets a little bit more kind of clean, straight-up jewelry. This is, in grad school, you get to play. So this was where I made a whole necklace out of frozen eggs. And so I froze the eggs, then peeled them while frozen, and then drilled a hole through them so that I could put them like beads. And then I did another. I tried to do, I think I did a time lapse there, but it was really, it was very uncomfortable because it's frozen and it sort of melts and it's icky. But was also interesting. So this was a display. Actually, this was part of my thesis show. What was also interesting. So I did basically make a whole other copy of the same necklace, and then put it on these Petri dishes. And first of all, of course, the eggs would melt, and then they would dry out. And what is interesting to me, I first, because of course I had to talk to the gallerist if I could even do that, because at first I thought it was going to smell really bad, but this is not what happened. What happened was it dries out, because people use paint, right, for painting, egg tempera and all of that. They're really good media for binding pigments. So it actually dried out into this kind of really beautiful looking glossy material. So that was interesting there. All right, so after grad school, I sort of reoriented maybe a little bit, and I think I went back to more jewelry in a way. So those were some pieces that I made at that time, and that had I included those 4 pieces because they sort of have a lot of the elements that I tend to have used. So like the 3D printing part, that was one of it that you can see in that part of there. Which was from a scan of a Buddha statue that we have in one of the galleries, the Asian collection in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian Institution. But also these like very kind of basic materials like this slate over there, and then this kind of, this was also actually a piece of slate. And these figures here were actually copies from what some of the engravings were on that Buddha statue there. So I traced it and cut it out of silver, likewise in the piece over on the right-hand side there as well. But I like to kind of capture that whole idea of this transformation of how one thing changes into another. So this whole idea of things melting, things kind of going sticky or whatever, that really fascinates me a lot. So I've been working with that, and this is one example that leads to a series of work that I've made maybe 6 years ago. So again, it involves something that melts. This is ice, and what I did was I used a 3D scan of this Buddha statue that was again available online freely from the Smithsonian Institution. Scaled it down and then 3D printed an original copy. Made a mold and then put water in it and put it in the freezer. So I had an ice copy of the Buddha statue like that. I also took just a very simple piece of wood, just a rectangular piece that was sort of the same size. Again, I made a mold and made an ice copy of it. And then then what I did, and that kind of leads to the work that I made from this, I used both of these ice pieces and let them melt together for a little bit until they sort of became one, and then put them back in the freezer as one piece. And then I basically made another mold out of that sort of in-between shape that was like that. And those were the kind of ingredients that I used in pieces like that. So you have this kind of fragment of the Buddha statue in the front there. In the back, you can see this a piece of wood, and then on the right hand side you sort of see this kind of weird, slightly amorphous looking shape that doesn't that came from that iced copy there. So very often I use that kind of stuff in my work. I think I might skip over the next thing, only to say maybe one thing. This thing here, this was so cool. So this is actually one thing where sometimes I get some of because you asked me the question about the rock from Mars.
Yeah.
So my husband was involved in this one mission to a comet that was actually with the European Space Agency, where they tried to land a spacecraft on a comet. And before it landed, it took a scan of the actual comet and beamed it back down to Earth. And that's the scan right there. So I sometimes, that was the only time I actually used something like that. So let's skip over here. So just the last thing that I maybe want to talk about, and that maybe leads a little bit to the work that we have here. So a few years ago, I just realized that I was really fascinated by water. I took videos of water all the time in different places, and I also made I also figured out a way how to make, I don't know why this is doing that, let's go here, how to make kind of a casting of a water surface, and I used that in my a series of work actually, and that is in this piece here. So this on the left hand side was a kind of clear casting of a water surface. It was a little complicated to make. And the other thing that I don't know, there's some autopilot going on here. The other thing that I started to use in this work, and this is why I wanted to show this because it's in that also, is I started to take apart old smartphones, and behind the glass screens are all these beautiful optical filters, sometimes mirrors, sometimes just like weird like screens, sometimes they kind of like change direction. And I included that sort of behind this water casting in the front are these filters, and they can create some really interesting kind of optical illusion-y sort of effects. And I kind of combined this with these vessels, if you will, and this is how I also, the next one sort of has that here. So this in the front also has this water casting with the optical filter. And this shape was from this laboratory, like a Petri dish, right? So that gave it the shape. And from a different direction, it looks like that. So depending on where you look at it from, it becomes like a mirror, or it becomes like you can see through and see what's behind it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, and I think I might just stop here if that's okay.
Yeah,
yeah?
I will actually have.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, can you tell me about these shapes? Because they're also at display there. The sort of
the
angular
zigzaggy thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so maybe I'll just show you that, because I literally have the slide right there.
Okay, nice.
So because it explains it, how my process worked for this one. Mm-hmm. So I have this whole collection of laboratory glassware here. So there's like little flasks and beakers and funnels and things like that. And and this is actually the kind of original one that gave birth to all the pieces in the exhibition, again through a mold. But what I do also is not just make a mold from originals, but this is a 3D scan over there. And then I sometimes use a computer program to kind of cut it up and slice it up. Uh-huh. And that's how I got some of this kind of more...
So it's sort of a 3D pixelated version.
That's right.
Of the
Exactly.
Stand.
Exactly.
Okay,
that's the word.
Nice.
3D pixelated. Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah.
Beautiful. So should we move on to have a conversation about what we have there and sort of practice more generally?
Yeah. Okay.
So
I close this? Or
I would say leave it.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's a nice reminder, since the show there basically features different iterations of the same image.
Yeah.
And I would be curious to hear how your relationship with that item changes through all these iterations that you go through.
I have to tell you, it's really strange. When I looked at this work, putting it up, because sometimes you make work, and then like I had some of it at my gallerist in New York, and I had to ask for it back, and so I hadn't actually seen it physically, so it was really strange to reconnect with it. And so I was struck by how this almost became like a person or an alter ego somehow, you know, and that's
with
how
what sort of personality?
No, just with like different. Oh, you could be this, or you could be that, or you could act like this way, you know, like that. It just seemed to take on, like a figure almost. Yeah.
And I guess, would you call it a beaker, or would you call it a little bottle?
Flask.
Yeah, that's a nice word. Yes. So would you say that the flask symbolizes well-being, or does it symbolize a path towards it?
I just always think about, like with these kind of vessels, like what other things have they held before, what was in them, what were they used for? And, that can be anything. I don't even quite know how this came into my possession. But from sometimes get these things from like chemistry labs, basically. And, or maybe pharmacy even. And that's where, I think, what substances were in this to kind of, I don't know, how do we interact with these things?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I don't know how many of you have been through there, but once all of you will, then you realize the wealth of materials. And as I was going through your website, I wrote down the different materials that you've used in your work. So let's see. We have rice glue, we have eggshells, we have laboratory vessels, wax, coroplast, gelatin, milk, porcelain, polyethylene, optical filters, silver, gold, silicone, concrete, silk, mirror, steel, iron ore, latex, charcoal, and so on. Is it, and this is me as a jewelry newbie, but is it common for a jewelry artist to be working with such a wealth of materials, or is it something that you feel like sets you apart?
I don't know. I can't really say. I think some people, so let's say this. I think there has been for a while a movement towards material exploration as an access to meaning in the work. I think that is definitely something that has been going on in the last 20 years or so in the jewelry field. My feeling is actually that we're coming to the end of it a little bit, that it's not as important anymore. And pretty much the idea was anything goes. And that
hence the eggs.
And the eggs and every exactly, yeah. So and for me also, I would say that over the years, certain materials I have stuck with me, and certain have not. Like latex, for instance, I just came to learn that is not a good material. Polyurethane, likewise, like some materials that are a little bit toxic, or have like. That was also actually the first reason why I even thought about gelatin as a material was because I wanted the jewelry to disappear and kind of go away at the end of the night, So that idea of something less permanent, that really always fascinated me.
I would be very curious to hear as to why. It does feel like this memento mori vibe is all about your work and your projects.
Yeah, maybe there is, I guess it's really funny because I never really thought of my work as memento mori, but I guess that is the undertone. So in that sense, I agree.
Yeah. What else would I like to ask you? I mean, I would be curious to also hear about the optical filters a little bit. So what do you know what the physics behind the way it works is? How do they function in such a trippy way?
Yeah, so I'm not a physicist, but my household is a little bit leaning towards physics. So I just totally came across this. It was like the best Christmas present ever. When I opened my first smartphone and I found like all these things, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't even realize these things existed. And then I thought it was also interesting to me because we're constantly interacting with these screens, right? And we're constantly moving around. And to me, there's sort of this idea of how those filters kind of almost function as a translator, as a communicator between the touch of your finger, a part of your body, and this kind of electronic I don't know what goes on there, right? To give us this kind of whole other world that we're constantly interacting with. I thought that was really fascinating to have that kind of medium. But then to answer your question about like how it works, from my understanding, they're like optical gratings. So they're like window screens, right? Where you know, with the oh, I don't even know what they're called. Like
the lamination.
Yeah. So when you fold them down and then you can't see through, or you fold them like this and you can see through. So it's basically allows the light to only go through in certain directions, from what I understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
And there's different types.
Yeah.
But that's the extent of which.
Sweet. That's more than enough. Thank you. I can imagine that working with such a wealth of materials and techniques, you encounter the technical challenges, as we spoke about before as well. And I'd be curious if any of the pieces or materials that we have here caused you a particular headache or came with its own set of special complicated challenges.
I mean, they're all a little challenging at times, but one, I'm not sure if that particular piece is here, or maybe it isn't. But I remember, so basically those flask versions, right? I have these castings and then I make settings for them, and the settings are kind of a very standard jewelry thing, right? I mean, that you make like a little frame basically to hold, like prongs to hold the thing in place and for it to become part of their composition. So that's one thing. And the first one where I tried to do this, I had so there's different materials that these little copies of these flasks are made from, right? And some are very straightforward, like porcelain slip, right? I mean, it's just like porcelain straight up, no, nothing complicated there. But then a material that I really liked a lot was I use eggshell powder that I grind down in a mortar and pestle into. So I just peel the eggs, grind it, and I mix that with gelatin. And then when it dries, it shrinks a little bit, but gelatin is a super strong glue. Actually, is what it's used for. So not the weird like drippy necklace, but it's actually like it has some really good physical properties. Very, very strong. Okay, so I thought this is great. And but what I then thought I'd do if you do like stone settings, you sometimes put the piece in what is called a thermoplastic. It's basically like a chewing gum or putty that holds the piece. It softens when you cover it with hot water, and it hardens when it's outside, right? So it holds the piece steady. I thought, this is a great thing. Let me do that. Of course, stupid me. Okay, this gelatin is really, really strong until you put it in hot water, because it dissolves. And basically my shapes just dissolve into mush.
There they went. And thus you learned.
Those were the blooper, yeah.
Okay. So we mentioned the memento mori sort of sense that I at least get from it works. There's even a sort of a skeleton hand in that room from the tiny versions of this flask. Yeah, it feels metaphysical, and I wanted to ask, what do you hold holy?
So I'm not a churchgoer or anything like that, although I grew up Catholic. But I do enjoy quiet places, and I think the time to just sit and be. Sometimes I don't think we do it often enough. But I think that is, if I don't have that in a day, I get cranky. Yeah. Lovely. So I think that it's just a way of being present and being at peace. And often, I live in a city, so I don't have a lot of nature around me. But definitely just being outside or like that. Those are the moments. That I hold holy. Yeah.
Thank you. My last question to you would be, when the viewers and your audience goes into that room and takes in that work slowly, hopefully, then do you have any hopes for what they should ask of themselves as they take it in, or what sort of question would you like to give them for that journey?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I think what I would say is just to look at everything and look past the bling. I sometimes worry these. I react the same way. These optical filters are very kind of
sexy,
alluding, right? And so look past it and see what's there. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Katja. I really appreciate this conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for all the fantastic questions.
I appreciate it.
It was great. Thank you.